Hello, my name is Georgia de Chamberet and I'm from Book Blast. I'm delighted to have been invited by LitFest Online 2020 to interview author and critic Gerald Jacobs about his latest novel, Pomeranski. It is loosely based on his memories of Brixton in the 50s and 60s and reimagines a particular time and place that is very different to the gentrified South London neighbourhood of today. Behind the entertaining story of Benny the Fixer Pomeranski and friends, there lie many various subplots and worlds and scenes. So good afternoon, Gerald. Tell us a bit about what inspired you to write Pomeranski.
Well, I suppose it dates from both of my parents dying in the first decade of the 21st century. My mother died in 2016. My father had died before her. And she just got to hold a copy of my previous novel. And I was thinking a lot about them and about the past, and in particular, that particular
previous novel, Gerald, was 9 letters?
9 love letters.
9 love letters.
9 love letters, published by Quartet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it was a very colourful, interesting, lively era with lots of very lively characters, and it just rolled on out of that, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So in that, you just talked about lively characters. How closely do the characters in Pomeranski resemble those you knew in real life? Are they sort of composite or certain key portraits, or completely fictitious, or a whole?
Well, you have to remember I was a boy as opposed to, grown up those times. And so a lot of the memories of individuals are impressionistic, but it went on to teenage. And they certainly do resemble, but they're not replicated. Apart from a couple of real life characters in this book, all of the characters are inventions. I know that people are going to say that Benny Pomeranski is modelled on my father, but they're very different in many ways. So yes, the thing is, the characters are invented, but the atmosphere is not. The atmosphere is totally authentic as far as I'm concerned.
And then you do weave in, that gives it a rather wonderfully authentic atmosphere, to add to the place, in a sense, is that there are real characters of the time, like Ruth Ellis and the boxer, Joey, and
he's a real character.
Musicians. So what is interesting is they almost have walk-on roles, if you like, and they kind of add. So, for example, when we meet the very sexy, seductive singer Estelle, she's in a club. What is it called? The Sly Fox, is it? In Mayfair?
In Mayfair,
right? And she's with Ruth Ellis and Ruth Ellis's boyfriend, who, of course, later Ruth Ellis kills. And then gets hung for, etc. There is an interesting, though they're fictitious, but you bring in real figures from the period, if you like.
Yes, there are plenty of characters who wandered the avenues of the arcade when my parents had a shop at that point.
So tell us about, So your parents had a jewellery shop, and whereas in the book we have Pomeranski gowns, so it's slightly different. It's the cloth trade. And some of the characters who come into, whether it's Pomeranski gowns or your actual parents' jewellery shop, tell us a bit about some of them.
Well, it's changed a lot, and I think you would probably want to know how it's changed from those days. But the characters, mostly in those days, the shopkeepers and tradespeople of the arcade in which they worked, were Jewish. That has kindly, over the years, segued into a West Indian culture. Mm-hmm. And that now seems to have been passing more into an African and mixed, and as I think you said earlier, gentrified sort of atmosphere. Mm-hmm. One particular character I'll just mention as an example, there was a racing tipster, an African racing tipster who called himself Raz Prince Monolulu. And he wandered up and down the arcade's lanes, avenues, saying, I got a horse. This was before betting shops were legalized. So he was doing things on the side, like most people in this book are doing things on the wrong side of the tracks. And he was a tipster. And he thought that he was, he said, I'm basing this on Edward III. He meant Richard III, my kingdom for a horse, but he called it Edward III. So that was a kind of colourful character. And there were lots of Jewish guys who'd sit around insulting each other and in Yiddish.
Okay. Well, you say, but 50s England, it was tough. It was post-war Britain. It was kind of grim. And there was still, I think, rationing. But it wasn't, war didn't end and then that was it. I mean, it's so there is that backdrop. So everyone is out, in a sense, trying to survive and get by. But actually, Benny Pomeranski in the book does very well. And he's got his little gang of chums and they all get up to sort of, but they're no good, but they're not high-flying gangsters. They're, let's say, more just sort of operators. And there is the burglaries, there's the diamond heist, so they are thieves, but they aren't. Somehow there's something almost quite endearing, quite small-time crooksish, sort of. He likes to think he's a Robin Hood character. So say more a bit about that where that comes from with Benny Pomeranski, the Robin Hood aspect.
Well, on the question of the hard times, the 50s are the seedbed for this, but it does go on beyond that into the 60s. And remember Harold Macmillan saying, "You've never had it so good." And they did quite well, people there. They're not all of them. My own father's business collapsed and then he started something else. It was, what I'm drawing from it is the dynamic atmosphere. They weren't gangsters, really. Yeah. He in fact, he felt it was almost a mission, a mission, a social and philosophical mission for him, because he believed that he was doing good things. He was avenging things. He was setting the world to rights. As you say, he thought of his team, the Astorians, they were called, after the Brixton Astoria, which was a wonderful big cinema in Brixton. He thought that they were doing, righting wrongs, and they never used violence unless it was necessary. That's how they looked, and that's how he looked on it. On the other hand, in the background, not in the background, perhaps on the side, one of the characters is a real out-and-out nasty,
very nasty piece of work.
Gangster, yes.
He runs the jazz club. So there's also that thing about having the front and then what's really going on in the back room, which is a classic thing.
Yes.
Yes, and so there's Benny Pomeranski and his gang doing diamond heists and things like that, but they're not. I mean, they're not killers or completely doing. I mean, that is reserved perhaps for other people in the book. Now the women, they're good-looking and resilient and funny about the men's inadequacies. Well, the men, bless, are sort of operators and very highly sexed, but pretty hopeless as companions. I mean, one of the characters, Sam, who has an unfortunate limp because he got caught in the tram tracks age 12 and had a nasty accident. He's rather angry and vengeful as a character, perhaps worsened by the accident. But his wife leaves him, then goes back to him, and then in the meantime, Benny's having an affair. So there's a rather muddled arrangement between the men and women, and that reflects life, perhaps.
Well, I hope it's not muddled to the reader.
No, not the reader, but I'm saying in themselves they are coming and going.
Yeah, the affair that Benny is having with the singer Estelle is very central to the book. Well, it's for you to interpret whether they're then losers and the women are witty and all the rest of it. That's up to you how that emerges. I'm not implanting any of that on the book.
No, I say operators, not losers. They're very successful. No, and that is human life, really. They have, Benny loves his wife, but then he also loves his mistress, and that who says you can't love two women? But that is a big point that the reader, as you say, it's up to the reader. And it also informs there's a lot of banter and jokes and repartee. There's very good dialogue, actually. It's almost, there's a playwright. There's the playwright aspect to it, almost. I can see it making a good sort of play. I mean, have you always had it, you was picked up language, because also there's a lot of Yiddish words woven through the text and all of that. So describe that aspect of it all.
Well, that's authentication. I mean, you know, these, as I said earlier, to me as a boy, it seemed that almost all the shopkeepers and people in those arcades, in that particular arcade, were Jewish, and they spoke Yiddish a lot, and they didn't speak it as a language as some Orthodox Jews in Stamford Hill now do. That's their mother tongue.
Yeah.
But they knew it, and they used it mainly for slang, mainly for insults. There's nothing quite like a Yiddish curse. If I can just give you a translation of one, if someone will say, there's one that says, may all your teeth be rotten. No, may all your teeth fall out, except for one, and may that be decayed.
Oh, right.
Yeah. That's pretty harsh, but you know, it's usually in fun. You know, they call each other schlemiel, and you know, it's the words that are now more or less in the English language.
Oh, yeah. Because now there's a Jamaican subplot involving a prize fighter. How were the Jamaican, because Jewish communities at the time it was the Windrush generation really coming over and settling in Brixton, and it was a Brixton landlord who had around Cold Harbour Lane where a lot of them, all the new arrivals settled. I mean, how close were they, and how, in terms of actual life, and your father, who, after having his stall, was a de facto photographer of the Jamaican community. So describe that whole relationship between the Jewish and the Jamaican community, and then your father's work as a photographer.
I've written a piece about Jewish Brixton in the 50s and 60s for the Jewish Chronicle in the May the 8th issue. And alongside it, a writer called Brian Stewart has written from the black point of view he's written about 3 particular Jewish heroes to his family, to his community, and to the black community generally. And he has he's done a lot of research, and it seems he's uncovered enormous rapport between, and this was going against the grain, because they were when the Empire Windrush people came over en masse from Jamaica, they didn't meet a warm welcome generally, because there were a lot of exploitative landlords, there was a lot of racism, and indeed there were the Notting Hill riots, to which some Brixton people went out to try and help out. One of his 3 Jewish heroes is Cyril Salmon, Lord Justice Salmon, who put behind bars 9 white thugs who'd just gone over to Notting Hill just to be, it could have been a woman, a child. Every time they saw a black person, they'd just go and they'd beaten up 6 West Indian men, there's 9 of them at different points. And he gave them all 4 years in prison. And there was a huge gasp in court, because you didn't give young boys like that.
That set a precedent, that's good.
Yes, so
rulings, you mean.
And in Brian's article, in the May the 8th JC, he quotes from the judgment of Justice Salmon.
And so your father, Harry Jacobs, tell us, he had a studio in, was it Landor Road?
It's really in Stockwell, it's on the edge of Brixton. Right. But most of his work was with Brixton people, almost exclusively, extending into Stockwell and Clapham. And his jewellery business went bust. And the way he started a photography business and how he built upon it successfully, it illustrates the difference between those days and these days. Yeah. So a friend of his who'd also gone broke said to him, people didn't have, smart cameras in those days. He said, I've got myself an expensive camera and I'm going around taking photographs. Why don't you try that? So he did. He bought himself a Leica camera. Oh,
Leica, good. Yeah.
Very good. And he, just imagine this now. He knocked on doors. A young woman would usually answer the door and he'd say, are there any children in the house? And she'd say, yes, I've got 3 kids. May I come and take photographs of them? Can you imagine that now? Usually, but this was a novelty, they said, yes, come in and take them. So he'd go there and he'd go back 2 days later with the proofs, pictures. And in In the meantime, her husband, her boyfriend, or whatever had come in and said, and she said, "Oh, a man came and took photos, and he's going to come back and if we want to buy them." He said, "Oh, forget that." So this was the typical scene. On the 2 days later, he'd come with the photo, and he'd say, "So," and she said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't, we don't have it because my husband said we can't have it." So he held up the picture of her child and went to tear it in half. He said, "Oh, you don't want it then?" And went to tear it in half, and then, "Oh, no, please, I'll take 3."
Good
And on that, King Solomon, on that Solomonic gesture, was built a very successful career in photography, which had him exhibiting in the Tate Gallery, the Photographers Gallery, and whatnot.
Because they would have sent the photos, I guess, back home to all their family in Jamaica. It's a nice way to see how they were getting on.
Did that. They would bring,
very nice.
Bring pictures over, which they want enlarged or treated as
of course.
And his studio, he eventually had a studio, and that was just such an enormous meeting place.
Well, I mean, what you're describing, and actually thinking about it, and that is Pomeranski in the book, it's entrepreneurial. So, when we say, are they crooks? Well, fine, they do bend the law, certainly, and some of the stuff isn't ideal, but they're not, as we were saying, gangsters, and it's an entrepreneurial spirit. And that spirit is actually, I mean, nowadays, I suppose they'd probably be all on Dragon's Den or something, selling some great idea.
The sly wink. With the dragons, yes.
The cat is the book blast cat.
Good.
Now, what about your own writing, other writing? Are you working on something else now, just because we've got a few minutes left?
Well, I'm wrestling with an idea, but this wrestling match is doing what they're now talking about the Premier League football doing. It's happening behind closed doors. So I cannot reveal what I'm, not because of great secrecy, but because it's not resolved. I'm not resolved of what I'm going to do with this idea, or if I'm going to do anything with it. So we'll draw a line under that.
Well, it takes time figuring it out.
Yes.
Because how long, Pomeranski, how long you had it there? How long before having the idea and then actually writing the book? And then
I had the idea many years ago, but then when, as I say, after my parents, I brought it into a closer focus as a story, as a novel, the characters are easy to find. And I think you were mentioning how it's changed, Brixton.
Yes, now Brixton then and now, and the market and everything, indeed.
Well, Brixton Market extends all over the place, but there was one particular arcade.
Well, it nearly closed, didn't it? They had to save it. There was a huge campaign to save it, I believe.
Well, there was one particular arcade, one where my parents had a shop, which is now called Brixton Village.
Yes, that's right.
And it's really true. And, there are all sorts of, as I was saying, most of these characters are Jewish in this book. They're not necessarily Jews, of which a lot of other people would be proud of because they weren't running the law. But Benny...
And there is a murder at the end. It gets quite dark. So
murder, there's this long love affair. It's not, polite.
There's a kind of vendetta. There's almost a vendetta that begins in a way. Murder's part of it.
The two bigger themes, the two grander themes, which I hope are subtly infused into it, are, first of all, self-teaching. He's an autodidact,
yes.
is Benny. He left school at 14, very intelligent, but he had to leave school to earn money for the family. But he spent a lot of time in libraries. He builds up an enormous vocabulary, and he's very distinct in his milieu because he knows a lot of words and books and things. He enjoys reveling in that against some of the people he's knocking around with. He is an unusual person.
So, Gerald, well, I think we are coming towards the end of our wonderful interview. We could go on a bit longer, but is there anything else? I mean, Pomeranski is a wonderful read. It's warm, it's funny, it's entertaining, it's sad. It's just got all that you need in a book, in a wonderful novel. And it's published by Quartet. And we hope that once, because this is being recorded during the COVID crisis, we hope that once bookshops open, that one can, of course, one will be able to buy it online. One can order it online. But the Owl Bookshop, all the various independent bookshops around London, London Review of Books, that it will be in stock around town. Yes, so Brixton, and the last, when did you leave Brixton? That was
oh, goodness me.
of course, you're still a Londoner, but you're up north rather than south.
Well, in the late 60s, I suppose. Yes, yes. And I did go back and walk around these haunts quite recently. And of course, it's changed a lot, but it's still the same layout, that arcade, that particular arcade, a thinly disguised version of which is in the book. And a lot of it's set there. But all that's changed is that it's different commodities and different salesmen and saleswomen. As I said, the different cultures have gone through. It's still a very diverse area. Brixton is very lively.
Well, that is nice, exactly. Though it's very gentrified, it hasn't been completely gentrified to the fact that it's lost. It's still a very bustling, vivid, wonderful. It's a wonderful neighborhood.
It goes right up to the time about 5 years before the tube station arrived in Britain. But the characters in the book, the story does go on. This is its seedbed, but it's not.
Yes, it's true. It goes on into the 80s.
It goes into the 80s, and even into it begins in the 21st century.
Thank you, Gerald. Lovely to be able to have this discussion, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Kat, as well.
And Pomeranski, there's Pomeranski is available online and in all good bookshops eventually, and published by Quartet Books. Thank you.
Thank you.